This week on No Idea Yet, we are talking about Indigenous people. This is quite a sensitive topic, so we wanted a pre-warning. We hope you enjoy the show, and if there's anything you think we didn't do right or feel we have offended in any way, please let us know, as that's not what we're trying to do on this podcast. We hope you enjoy.
Yeah. Jordy, yeah.
Too afraid to ask, too lazy to Google. Welcome to No Idea Yet. I'm today's host, Jolly. Welcome me, and welcome Freddie.
Hello.
And Alistair.
Oh, hi.
To the show. Join us on a journey to find out how little we know. First, we'll discuss a topic we may or may not think we know. Then we'll go away for a week to research. We'll then discuss our findings and hopefully learn something along the way. They don't know the topic right now, but they will soon, because the topic is Indigenous people.
Ooh. Indigenous people.
I don't know if you know much about this, and the reason which I thought of this is I went to Canada, got family over there. I actually wrote Canada. No, it's Canadian. And it's the First Nations, which is like an indigenous tribe, in fact, like, you know, Native Americans. But it was in Canada, and again, they had like a really rough past, which is still currently going on, as with the in America. And it's just a case of the things I've got for like First Nations, Aboriginals, Inuits as well, although I'm not sure if that's the right terminology to use. I'm assuming with anything, there's loads of different, like with Native Americans, there's loads of different tribes and areas, and it's like to put one broad sweeping statement is like saying someone from Liverpool and someone from London are the same, in the sense of being like they're actually like worlds apart, although they are in the same country. It doesn't necessarily mean it, especially of a time of where it's America, it's massive, so you may have had some people who haven't even come into contact with each other before.
Yeah, those Aboriginal Scousers, mate, they'll be after you.
And again, Australia being absolutely whack to Aboriginals, to put it lightly.
Yeah. Did you hear the news then recently about the Canadian mass graves that were found in schools? That's why I thought you were talking about it.
Strap in, guys. It's going to be a cheery episode this week.
Talking about Indigenous people,
it's not going to be
super happy.
But I thought you were mentioning it because recently it was uncovered that there are mass graves in residential schools in Canada of Indigenous people, Indigenous children, children graves, and and so basically they've just started a big full-scale recovery. I mean, they're admitting to their bloody history, but it's not. I don't know what they're going to do about it.
It's one of those things which, you know, like, you're not at all out of the woods in the slightest, but some countries take it a lot better than others to be like, yeah, we messed up kind of thing, but we're trying to be a bit better. And other ones are being like, nah, it's fine, mate. It's just absolutely fine. Don't worry about it at all.
I wonder who you're hinting at there.
What?
The thing is, I mean, I'm not saying that the Australians aren't terrible people, and they're just English people that we sent over it. Yeah, but like, they are trying to revive in some ways like Indigenous languages, and they are trying in some things. But also, like, think South America as well. Oh my god!
Yeah,
like
there's so much stuff as well of like you can't damn an entire country because of what either a portion have done or the history has done, and you're trying to like get rid of it, and it's, you know, changing the guard.
For the sins of your father.
But like, yeah, as long as you can say, as long as people are trying, but at the same time, it's like, you do or do not, there is no try. You know, it's either you're doing something or you're not doing something. You know, and if you're trying to do something, then you are.
Just quote Yoda.
I did just quote Yoda.
What time to quote Yoda? He was an Indigenous person, I think, with Dagobah, so, you know.
Oh, was he though?
I have no
We actually don't know where Yoda species come from.
They're called the Yoda species.
I'm glad
It's not called Yoda species.
No.
There's three. Is there four? There's Yoda, Grogu, and there's a female
Star
one.
Wars knowledge me here.
And another one.
Dagobah was about the extent of my knowledge of that. Just the word.
Dagobah system. Right, so the first thing I'll say is Indigenous people, definition. Alistair, go.
I'd have thought it's like the earliest people, the earliest humans in a place, or the ones who were there before, sort of whoever was there now.
So would that be in direct correlation to colonizers?
Yeah, it would be people who were there before the colonizers came, basically.
And
maybe slightly simpler to look at it, but I assume the definition is going to be slightly more specific than that.
Yeah, related to the fact of like maybe it's actually, yeah. And Freddie? Anything to add on that?
Just because if you kill all the indigenous people in an area,
I like the first word you said was if you kill.
because that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
And then you move there, do you become the indigenous people? I only mean that because humans move around so much, right? I'm assuming there's island nations where there were people before, and then other people came over, killed all them, and they took over, and then we'd class the next people as indigenous.
Do you what's a current event of this? You could say
it's Tasmania, I believe, is the only one of the very few. Oh, we can double check this, but
no,
I think I've heard that Tasmania is one of the only. This is very wrong use of the word successful, but air quotes successful genocide was in Tasmania, i.e. where they literally wiped out.
That is an air quote. That is an air quote. I really thought you were going to say successful, like integration, or do you like revival?
Nope. as in.
It's
they
one of
literally
those things
killed every indigenous Tasmanian.
Wow.
I mean, it's like the proper use of the word, right? It's like successful murder or successful suicide. You're like,
just that. I was going to say, the thing you're saying, like, about indigenous, I guess you'd say, like, native people to an area, is that there's a huge conflict at the moment, which is kind of stemmed in that, and that's Israel and Palestine, which you won't properly go into, but that's a case of somebody claiming a right to be either the first there that they're owed it, or the ones who've been there for centuries anyway, so they feel they're native, so... Yeah. But that's
less in the news, I guess, but probably not similar. Cyprus is split in half. It's got the Turkish half and the Greek half, and the Greeks are the ones that were there first. The Turkish came over only like within 2 generations, right, and took over the top half and the north half. So the people there now, it's been a generation. The Turkish children, they're just like, they feel like they're part of that area, but the south, the Greeks are like, get them out, like they shouldn't be here. But like, I'm not saying that the Greeks are indigenous to Cyprus. I don't know if anyone is indigenous to Cyprus now, but you get the idea, right? Like within a generation, it's difficult to prize apart stuff. Like,
yeah, because if that's your family home, because my parents lived there, and I have no memory of before I was alive, so therefore my family home, then it is a case of that's where all your memories are, the nostalgia, the kind of thing, and that's where you feel comfortable. And then for somebody to say like, oh no, because of whatever reason, before you were alive, this isn't actually your home. It's that's not for or against any party. But so my actual next question was name some examples, and you've done well. Are there any other kind of like indigenous people that you can think of? And I guess I think the first things that come to mind are like Native Americans, Aboriginals. But like, can you think of anything else? Because I guess were you saying like in Cyprus or like Palestine and Israel? Like we're talking about that kind of thing as well, aren't we? So, and then I also put a question of name some issues, which we've also pretty covered.
I'm just thinking like, I mean, countries in Africa which were split up obviously by European people going, all right, this is yours now and this is mine. Did we class the tribes that are in those areas as indigenous if they're the only people that are there? They're just the people of the area, right? Does indigenous require other people being there too?
I don't know if there's like a time thing on to be indigenous you have to have been there for X amount of years as well. I don't know.
No, I'm saying these people have been there since the dawn of human time.
Yeah.
Like
humans are all originated in Africa, right? So
do we say it's indigenous, or do we say that's just where they are?
Brute fact.
I'm saying the people like who haven't moved and no one's kicked them all out. I'm not saying that we haven't committed horrendous genocides. I'm just saying that like they're still there and no one else is.
I feel like indigenous could just mean just where someone's like, are we indigenous to England effectively? Or would you always bring it back to the fact if you don't live in Africa, then you're not indigenous to an area because you moved at some point in history by walking?
I think we're going to have to research, aren't we?
I think that's it.
Might, yeah. I was born in this exact spot and I haven't moved. Every single one of my ancestors was...
So I'll lead on to the last question, which I've saved, is uncontacted tribes. And what kind of thoughts? Because some people feel, well, let's bring him up to speed, or let's try learn off him, or maybe just leave him alone. I'll see you got any thoughts on uncontacted tribes?
Every time in history when we have contacted or tried to improve anything like that, it's always gone terribly badly. Like, I mean, there's a huge problem in Australia, I think, with like sort of introducing alcohol to indigenous peoples, and they obviously it's like it's basically really all lives. There's a thing in a book I was reading about these tribes in Mexico, who were introduced to like just they used to be these like running tribes. They used to run. They do this sort of superhuman fitness and all this kind of thing, and then they just got introduced to a sort of more westernized foods and things like that, and they all just became like lazy sort of
oh man.
Probably oversimplifying a little bit, but it's
I love the idea of like let's contact the tribe and let's teach them how to be lazy.
Worse. Let's make their lives easier. And, I think a lot of things you read, people have a very romanticized view of like the past and how all these kind of how much better life was, but obviously I don't know, it's balanced probably.
But for them it's not the past, right? We're saying it's the past because we imagining ourselves as being in that state, but I mean we haven't been for hundreds of generations, if not thousands, but they have for those thousands of generations. So for them it's the present, right? Isn't that weird that we're like really
it's kind of like one of the closest you could get to time travel, I guess, would be to do that.
I was just going to say two things. One is like, if you remember that all people on this planet are people, and someone came over to you and was like, hey, stop doing things your way. Like, I mean, I know for a fact that if I tell my brother, who I lived with my whole childhood, if I tell him, hey, you're doing something wrong, do it this way, he's going to tell me to go boop. But so, like, no wonder, like, I mean, if you have a community of people and you go over there and you say, this is how you should do things, no wonder they're going to resist you. I'm just thinking, like, just remember that we're all humans and we're all probably going to resist change.
I think it'd be interesting, John, I don't know if it's something you want to touch on, but, like, are there any kind of, like, positive stories of, like, colonial anything meeting indigenous people and then, something positive from the indigenous people's perspective? But
plumbing.
I feel like,
but what did the Romans ever give us? Well, they gave us really good roads. Okay, besides roads, what did the Romans ever give us? Well, plumbing and healthcare. Oh, okay, besides all that.
Full heating, mate. On it,
like you could even say of like where some people have done something right once, you can bet that there's like 20 times before that it was absolutely terrible. And it's like, oh, well, maybe they improved this area, but it's like, you can bet that like everybody else got messed over though. Other than that. Yeah, so I think, unless anyone's got anything else, we'll start to have a little cheeky wrap up. So the questions I'll give you now, so you can write them down. I don't see you getting your pens. So the first one is definition. So I think part of that will probably help towards the actual thing. And I'm going to research a definition anyway, but to start you off. Some examples. So again, you can have a look at just a little bit of a mosey on to find different examples of them. Name some issues. So again, there's some issues. You can find them.
Some issues. Playing very fast and loose with.
Yeah. So I guess what I'll do is for Alistair, I want you to look up. I'm going to say Canadian First Nations, and also which could be offensive to put the two and two together to seem the same, but I'm just going to say very northern and probably to more colder climates, if you can see anything for like Inuits and like people who are in that the northern circle. And then Freddie, go for Aboriginals in Australia. And then for both of you to also go for some uncontacted tribes and see like things of like how uncontacted are tribes now anyway, because there are still planes that still go above people, so like, I imagine that however uncontacted tribes may be, they're still aware of some kind of presence. So I guess just to look into a bit of that.
Oh, that's wild. I'm just thinking, like, just seeing a plane, would I be able to make the connection that that's not a bird or something if I've never seen it?
Because you've seen that clip of like where it's a plane going past, it's relatively low, and it's got like a super zoom lens on it, and you can see loads, like there's about like 5 people on like the shore of a river, or the bank of a river, and they're just looking up at it, just like looking, and you're like, yeah, they notice that you're there.
Oh man.
Are we more like chimpanzees or bonobos? That's the question. Also, dogs and wolves. There's some like similarities between the two.
That's a tangent and a half.
No, is it though? So just a quick one for like
comparing tribespeople to wolves. And
no, so if you look between like how chimps interact with other chimps and how bonobos interact with other bonobos, and same with dogs and wolves, like the social structure is different. So you could try to think of where they're completely opposite. Chimps, if they see another troop, they'll just try to kill it. Bonobos, if they see another group, they form a bigger group for a while, and they all get like lovey and do whatever because that's how they work. And then same with dogs and wolves. Wolves will just try to kill each other, and then dogs, they're dependent. They may be friendlier. So it's a case of, do you think humans are the former or the latter? You know, are we friendlier or are we more hostile towards other groups? Yeah. You can also fact check me as well.
But yeah,
research.
That'd be more of like a personal thought. You're like,
I think humans are really nice to each other all the time.
And I was brought up in a nice place, and everyone's nice to me.
I've never killed anyone, and I've never been killed, so it must be fine.
That's true. What comes
right, so you'll see us in a couple of seconds, and we'll see you in a week. That's all from us for now. Not for you, which is quick. Bye.
That's just a screenshot there.
Right, to it. So I'd like you to welcome us back to the show. So I'm gonna go first to Freddie. What have you learned about your? No, I'm not. I'm gonna go to Alistair. I changed my mind because whose dog is that?
Very loud dog in the background, mate. We definitely need to redo all of that.
Be loud.
I don't know where to mute. Oh, I need to have
Can
that
I
ready
mute
to
the
mute
dog? How do I mute the dog in this machine?
Excuse me, have you got a mute button on your dog?
Sadly, you can only mute him permanently. Okay, I've got the mute button ready. I'll be able to mute myself next time.
Yeah, so Alistair, I asked you about, because I wasn't, so this is definitely some naivety towards it, because as with anything, for like same with like Native Americans and then for Inuits, that's just one term that we know for what is just a broad people, if you know what I mean. So I mean, I'd be like, oh, you think Inuit, but that may just be one actual small band of people, and there's lots of different types, all with different names and factions. Again, I'm not 100%. So, Alistair, you've done some research. So
I've done a little bit of research. So, the first thing in terms of the different kinds of, so the different names and everything, and the different places people come from, there was a lot, funnily enough. So, Eskimo was sort of further north in Canada, and then you've got, actually, to be honest with you, I think if I start trying to pronounce all these, there's going to be quite a few that I'm just going to butcher so heavily that it's quite bad. I'll give you an idea of how many there are. There's about sort of 20 to 30 on here. Well, actually, I'll tell you what, I count them because, yeah. I think, personally, my go-to would be if you meet someone who is of any of these nationalities, just best ask them. Just say, "Oh, how do you identify?" Or like, you know, there's nothing rude about that. I don't think if you just, you know, if you're respectful in how you do it, I think it's, you know, that's worth doing, and they'll tell you what they like to be referred as. If it comes up in conversation, I think.
I mean, because we're obviously there's the general outline, and then there's the more focus that we've said that we've researched. Did either of you guys actually look into the definition? Because this actually was really, really interesting. Because I'm hoping you did.
The definition. How embarrassing. So I looked up two definitions, only like basic ones. So it was just for the actual word itself. So first was indigenous, and that was originating or occurring naturally in a particular place, and then semicolon native. So indigenous is a bit more vague, whereas native, for the noun at least, there's different adjectives as well. A person born in a specified place or associated with the place by birth, whether subsequently resident there or not. So Freddie, do you want to elaborate on more of the description?
Well, this is why I got. Well, I just realised how little. It's always how little, you know. So it's the UN system does not have an official definition of indigenous. It says that considering the diversity of indigenous peoples, an official definition of indigenous has not been adopted by the UN. Instead, a system has been developed for modern understanding of the term based on, and then it has self-identification, historical continuity, links to territories, distinct social, economic and political systems, languages, non-dominant groups of society, and resolve of them to maintain and reproduce their ancestral environments. And it's just like, oh yeah, like this isn't just, are you from Basingstoke? This is so much more. Like, that's what. I guess so that was like, yeah.
You see it a bit for like, well, I always feel like Americans being like, oh yeah, no, I'm Irish, and being like, yeah, maybe like a distant relative was once Irish, but I feel like, no, you're not really. You can't really like toot that horn. But in the same way, you say you can't just assume in the same way to say if you weren't born there, then you're not Irish. Then, let's say if you were born in like I don't know, Italy, but you had Irish mum and dad, you brought up Irish in the sense of like language, culture, everything like that. So it's still close to home, even though you brought up in another country. You still have that culture and that kind of knowledge, which would quantify as someone being from a native. You know what I mean? Is that if you're looking at the UN terms, say for language and culture, it's what you pass down, as well, because it's not just where you're born, but
because it's just
how much choice do you think there is in that? How much agency do you think there is in that for individuals to say, no, this is what I identify as? Because obviously that could go too far. Obviously, you can have people identifying things that they're clearly not. As Freddie, I think you said there's that pay money wubby thing of that guy that very very white man who completely is convinced he's black, and it's absolutely mental.
It's crazy. I mean,
in general, sort of on the more sort of sane end of the spectrum, how do you guys think about the whole, like, in terms of how much agency or how much choice you should have in how you define yourself from that respect?
I mean, the part about being Indigenous is that you kind of descend from people who inhabited a country or geographic region at the time when people of different cultures or ethnic groups actually arrived for the first time. So it's not, I don't know, I feel like it's a different thing from just being from somewhere. Like, I don't know, it's difficult because, like, I mean, for example, Cyprus. Cyprus currently has two parts to it. It has the Turkish side and it has the Greek side. Now, it's been long enough that, I mean, originally it was all Greek, but then the Turkish came over, right? And so then the problem is that now enough generations have passed that people who are Turkish have been born there and have lived there their whole lives, but the Greeks still see them as people who are invading. And I know this isn't the same as, let's say, the Spanish when they arrived in Colombia. It's just that it's so difficult to prize it apart.
Yeah. What I mean, like, to very, like, to ignore anything else of, the idea of, like, American independence, of suddenly somebody who was originally from one area went to another and then started saying, actually, I'm not from that area anymore, I'm from this area. And I guess you're saying that agency changes from one to another, so where do you allow that? So in the same way you're saying for like in Cyprus, someone will say, well, because I was always originally from here, whereas you only just moved here, or it's the same with Palestine and Israel. That's a whole different thing, but this is what people have wars over.
I guess it depends why you want it. Like, so, do you need? It's part, like, there's a self-identifying part that really anyone could identify as what they want, right? If I wanted to identify as just being from this square, I can, like, just right here. But when there's more to it, like there's people trying to push out your culture, or people trying to literally, I mean, I researched the Aboriginals of Australia, like horrendous crimes against humanity, and it's like, then you're trying to, well, you're proving your identity for another reason. There's more to it. So you're right, though. Where do you draw the line?
What's the stake kind of thing? Exactly.
And the hardest thing is what, there's a lot of, I don't use the gatekeeping, but the idea of, like, how do you know someone is something, and then it also means, well, how do you know when someone isn't something? So it's that kind of it's hard to.
That's where gatekeeping comes in, right?
And the biggest thing as well for, like, definitely on the internet, of white people saying something when they have no idea of a culture, they just assume they're trying to help and they're totally not. If you know what I mean, of being like, oh no, this is racist or this, and it's like, no, actually being racist by doing that thing that you're doing because you have no idea about someone's culture, you're just assuming something. But yeah, so I go for.
There's a great line, sorry, just very much appropriate to what you were saying. There's a great line in the new Bo Burnham's new comedy special, which I'd recommend highly to anyone who hasn't seen it. It's called Inside. But there's a line that basically is sort of, it's got a sock puppet thing. He's sort of taking the mickey out of how messed up the world is through a little thing with a sock puppet. But one of the lines in it goes, "Why do you rich white people insist on seeing every socio-political conflict through the myopic lens of your own self-actualization?" He's like, this isn't about you, so, But absolutely, what is a huge problem. Yeah. But I say that not even as far as cultural appropriation, but just that whole idea of wanting to, I don't know,
be involved in
everything and and
Yeah.
become
You don't
that.
need to.
Oh look, I'm so aware. I'm so woke.
I'm so woke.
Yeah, exactly.
Woke,
Yeah.
woke. Right, so I'll go for Freddie for Aboriginals then. Sorry to sideline you, Alistair, just because Freddie
No,
said
please.
it most recently.
Oh, sure. Well, this was absolutely mind blowing. I mean, just so from what I gathered of the history, is that humans as in Homo sapiens, split off from other groups of hominids. Like 70,000 years ago, we were definitely our own species. We're definitely Homo sapiens. There were other guys around. There were Neanderthals, Denisovians. There was there's a lot of other stuff like that I just didn't even realize about. And people had split and arrived in Australia by 50,000 years ago, right? This is before everything else. And the people who were in Australia and
Wasn't
lived
it
there,
because the land was different? Then, like there was more of a bridge. Was that long enough ago that Australia was actually easier to get to than it is now?
No. They still had boats, but
Or even because they had 50,000 years ago. No, I suppose they probably did.
It's absolutely mad. But the longest surviving.
I don't think there was a land bridge 50,000 years ago all the way to Australia. Actually, that's showing my lack of knowledge of geography right there. But
yeah.
I don't think that's 50,000 years.
No, Pangaea is like billions. But it's just the fact that, like, in the human history kind of style, like, if you think of everything you know about human history, we're talking everything, and then go before it, and then go before it, and then, oh yeah, but what about discovering farming? No, go before this. Australians were already there. Like, they were chilling and having, I guess, a feast on the kangaroos and other large animals at the time. And so from that, like, unbroken line of lineage from then until now, it's just madness. Other stuff is basically that there's at least 250 distinct language groups of languages, like 800 languages at least, like within the different tribes and different groups of people there. There's also there's two ethnic and culturally distinct groups, despite extensive cultural exchange, and this is the those that I guess we commonly see as the Aboriginals, and the others are the Torres Strait Islanders. So they're actually separated. I don't know when they separated exactly. Yeah, the thing is that I've got so excited about the history that, I mean, there's so much culture, there's history, there's language, there's their beliefs that I don't know how much we have really time to go into. And this it was just touching the tip of the iceberg on this. But the facts are that there were about 3/4 to 1.25 million native people around 1910, and then that's when the massacres began. And about 10 to 33% of Aboriginal Australian children were forcibly removed from their homes, and they just kind of tried to ethnically cleanse Australia, basically. So, yeah, and it wasn't until 1965 that Aboriginal Australians even had full citizenship and voting rights. Yes, so when our parents were being born, basically.
I'm going to say there's still loads of issues now in Australia with Aboriginals, and it's not over by any means. I feel only from like what I've like glanced off from different like media and news.
No, of course not. Like, and it's just like these guys were there separate from the rest of humankind for 50,000 years, and then the British went over and had no idea what the fuck they were going to... Oh, sorry, pardon my language. They had no idea what they were doing, and they handled it appallingly. And the problem is that they still haven't, like, they're not putting enough effort into figuring out how it is that they can really... they can never fix the situation, but make amends for what happened. Because a lot of the Aboriginals... I mean, when I went to Australia, I saw the protest. Have an ongoing protest that says that they don't recognise the Australian government as having power for totally valid reason. And so I don't know what the solution could be if there was one, but it's not been handled in any way well. I mean, I really enjoy the linguistic part because like there's a lot of painful linguistic cleansing where they didn't allow Aboriginal children to speak their own languages. And as in schools, imagine in a school you have to learn another language to just to learn, to have the education. So you're not going to have the quality education that you would have, and so then that just spirals, right? You've already at a disadvantage, and that's only one aspect they're at a disadvantage of, and it's just no, like, the steps are being taken, and it is interesting to see what's going on, but I don't know, it's just madness. But
it's a really good it was a cooking show actually on Netflix. It was about history of food, and it started in the first opening scene was about Aboriginals, how they learned how to hunt and cook, and just the whole, and then it also delved a little bit into the fact of how, you know, you're just trying to keep your culture alive, because for so many years it's just been people trying to cleanse it and get rid of it. You know, languages, like them nearly disappearing because kids are forced out of learning their own culture and like things like that. And it's, yeah, and just how people now, you're having to almost cling on to your culture when usually it should be just be inherent, you know. But you were saying about like how humans originated, so I did a bit of research on this, and so it seems humans originated from the African continent, and this is the case. I think I saw something recent, but I couldn't find it, about maybe you found even older fossils in another area, but more than likely it's a case of 62 million years ago. The fossil record is entirely in Africa of early humans. It's just a case of that's just where we find everything. And then we first migrated out of Africa into Asia about 2 to 1.8 million years ago, which is crazy. And then I know for a thing of like, it was the Aztec, I think it's the Aztec pyramids, they're the same, or they're younger than Oxford University. I think part of the reason why, when you always think it's mad, because you always think like Aztecs being ancient civilization way before our time, whereas actually Oxford University, not as we know it now, that was already founded and people were teaching there already, which is just mad. I think part of the reason why is because of the actual how humans migrated. Like, I think, if I'm right, we ended up in South America a little bit later than they did in Europe, for instance, because of how the landmass worked. So I think it was, so if you're going from Africa, you're going up, left to a bit of Europe, and then you're going right through all of Asia.
Like you like left and right, not east
turn
and
left
west.
at the hill.
Oh yeah, turn left. Sorry, it's because I'm looking at the right. Yeah, so you turn a little bit west, and you hit the end of Europe, and then you go east, and then you go across Asia, and then eventually you get to North America, and then down to South America. So it's one of the places where it took a little bit longer for us to migrate to. So maybe why there's a bit of a difference.
But doesn't that absolutely blow your mind that there were like the people who are living as in the jungle in South America with like their way of life, their knowledge that they've had passed down for the generations, they descended from people who would have been living in Alaska and Canada, like because
Cold.
who settled there, and as they come down and down and down and down, like more and more south. Like I just can't picture like the amount of time it must have taken us to just be like, nah, I'm not staying here. Let's go to the next place. Yeah. Oh, just madness.
I looked a bit about. I thought, as you guys look into for different areas which are still very much current now, I thought, well, I'll look at the UK. When did people settle there? Just I'll do the easy one. And that was about sort of different things. One said about 40,000 years ago, as they found a jaw fragment in Kent's Cavern in Devon. However, due to adverse climate, people tend to move in and out of the UK because it was like, oh, we'll go in for a bit. Nah, it's well too cold. Let's go out again. Then other things, another source said it's about 800,000 BC, so that's even longer than that. And I think what it is they actually found tools and remnants, but may have been actually finding more bones and like more remnants of people staying around. That's when it was. But definitely, we've been solidly continuously in the UK for about 12,000 years. 40,000 definitely for like people starting to live there, and then for nearly 1 million years people have been around the area, or at least early humans. Yeah, and then another fun fact, just as we're onto the thing about, do you know like where stuff originates from, and maybe a bit about culture of I'm sure I've told Freddie this, but chilies, they're only from Mexico. So they originally, I think it was the Portuguese, they saw chilies, which are actually a berry, which is kind of cool. Saw chili peppers, like, this is cool, we'll just go take it around the world. I think Europeans didn't really like it because they're lame, I don't know. And then it ended up in like India and East Asia, and that's where you think now of Indian food and like.
That was the trigger warning, by the way, guys, for the whole episode. Europeans are lame.
But you think of like how in drenched spices for like when you think peppers is for like Indian culture, for instance, and at least as we know, And that's something which is actually not as, the originator in Mexico. It was only since we moved, people moved, the Portuguese moved it from one country to another, that it got so entrenched in a culture that's like a huge component of it, which is mad. As the same for corn.
Same with, imagine tomatoes. We didn't have tomatoes.
Yeah.
Like the Italians were making pizza. They didn't have tomatoes on it. Tomatoes weren't discovered yet.
Like potatoes. Potatoes were from, someone, I can't remember where they're from. But again, like the UK's, like, we put potato in like literally every dish, and like it's stupid, the amount that we use it, and it's not even from here originally. And like corn that originally started in Mexico or in the Americas, and the first corn, when you think of sweet corn, you think of how many kernels are on it. I think it's about 400 kernels on one piece of corn. The first corn had about 8, and then we selectively bred it to have about 400. How do you even see like a tiny little bit of corn and be like, these 8 things, I want lots of these, just you wait. And it took ages for it to go from South to North America properly because of the climate. But yeah, just mad that kind of like as we're talking about human origins of where we kind of move around, also for food, and like I think it's just really cool.
Food
and that was certainly in our nature, right? It was definitely in our nature I think that's one of the things that kind of was quite interesting with the Inuit population, the Eskimo, and all this kind of thing, is the fact that they've chosen to settle, or at face value, but they've chosen to settle somewhere that seems pretty, like, you'd maybe, we're going to travel through loads of, like, ice and frozen oceans and everything to arrive somewhere with ice and frozen ocean and be like, yep, we're staying here.
Yeah, this is the place.
Yeah, this is the spot. So
I'll lead on to that. So what have you found for your more northerly population?
There was one very interesting kind of story that I came across. It's, again, very specific, but it's obviously not for the whole lot of it, but it's basically about this guy called Minnick Wallace. So you can look it up. There's quite a few articles about it. There's a whole paper published on it. But yeah, there's a good article by the Pierre Macmillan Arctic Museum called "Caught in the Middle: The Tragic Life of Minnick Wallace," and essentially it was this.
It's not going to be a good story, is it?
It's not a good story, I'm afraid. Basically, this American explorer went north. He's trying to find the North Pole. That was his that's what he was going to try and do. And he went off, and on the way that he found these Inuit people who were living, and their whole way of life was basically surrounding these. Well, the reason they chose to settle where they had was because they had these 3 meteorites that landed there, however long ago before, and they all had loads of iron and stuff in them, so they were like sort of using these. It sounds crazy, right? Then the this American this guy basically, like, it ended up shipping the meteorites all the way to a museum in America, which is their whole way of life. And he basically and he also he got them to come with him as to sort of help him it took like years to get these meteorites. And then he promised them, we're gonna give you, we're gonna come back and give you, give the money to the people here, and make their lives better. And it ended up they came with him, and they were just sort of on show in this sort of like kind of a
exhibit,
almost a zoo kind of exhibit. They were sort of the show rather as much as the meteorite was, and it's all pretty appalling, and not nice. But yeah, then there's one of the real sad parts of it was this Minnick Wallace. The museum told him that that his father had a burial after his father died, and he then found out this kid the kid was adopted in America, and then like had the whole issues there, but he found out that the museum actually had a fake burial for his father, and had actually kept the remains on display in the museum. And so he it's just appalling. This is getting worse. It gets worse.
When was this? How long ago? When
this
was
is in the 1800s, I believe. Let me double check. But
wow.
Yeah, in 1897 he was born.
I feel like
late 1800s.
That's Jeez.
Tell me I'm wrong, but I feel like it's going to be. They're still there. Like, I feel like the museum probably still has it.
Oh god, the rocks are still in the museum. Yeah, I mean they said, like, obviously that's a huge problem in and of itself, right? Like,
they're still
giving
there.
You can never undo.
But they're like 3-ton bits of rock. They're not going to be.
But
they're not going to be stolen anytime soon, or they're not going to.
But it's that thing, isn't it? Like, first it's like, look at these cool things we brought back from this place, and they're on exhibit, and then like years later, the exhibit. Look how racist we used to be and how horrible we were. Yeah, but there's still an exhibit.
We're taking photos like click.
Like, you haven't. That guy's body may still be there because it's still like, oh, it's history now, but it's still not right. You haven't done anything to change it.
It's like the British Museum. Like, I mean, we haven't touched on it, but that's a really poignant. I mean, just like the British Museum has a lot of everyone else's stuff, and we're not done looking at it, so we're going to keep it. Like
that's the James Acaster bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, excuse me, that's ours. You've got a plaque next to it that says it's ours. It's like, yep. Like,
and how important it is to you and your people? Yep, but we're not done. Exactly. Like, finders keepers, shut up.
Man.
It's terrible. It's a funny bit, but that's it's pretty.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a funny.
that
was actually a good stand-up.
A guy I work with actually had the kind of some archaeology stuff, and he was talking about how he was like, oh well, if we gave it back to them, they wouldn't look after it properly and stuff. And I was like, what? How can you really say that now? Like, I don't know. Like, at what point does it? Oh no, it's history now, so it's fine. It needs to be a museum so that other people can see it. And like, I don't know. I really I find that all a bit like just.
Can we draw parallels with people moving into areas that you're like suddenly it's like no, yeah, but it's been long enough now that it's ours. No, but it's not. No. It's still not yours. You just stole it ages ago.
Yeah, it's definitely it's an amusing contradiction of sort of morals, right?
Yeah, so it's like, look how bad we used to be, but we're kind of still doing it, but now we feel morally righteous about doing it, because that's the whole point.
If they're like charging loads of money for it, because the money they make off it, they sort of, they don't, I don't know.
Yeah, but does what they give back? Like, so lots of people came to see the thing that's yours, here's some money for it, and we put out an apology on our Instagram. So there's that.
What do you want? This is,
Yeah, oh my God.
That's pretty cool.
So you're saying there was about this... Was it 20 different?
Yeah, to go back to sort of the so the First Nations is what Canada officially calls the people who sort of who were there originally, and there was a pretty amusing on a slightly lighter. Well, it's not really lighter now because it's still pretty bad, but there was a thing called the Beaver Wars, which sounds quite amusing. No, it's basically that fur pelts became obviously very for a long time they were like the height of fashion, sort of 18th century, and so there was demand. That's kind of one of the big reasons people actually pushed out there in like sort of further north into Canada, and as they went further north, sort of encountered more of these native peoples there. Basically, the stories of what happened there is all pretty appalling. Really, it was always what can we none of the I don't know. Do you think if you went out with sort of a truly philanthropic nature, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Still go.
Would you still be around, and would you have survived to tell the story? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe that's why all the stories are so terrible, because the whole history is written by the winners, as it were. But obviously that's very. I feel bad in using that word, but yeah.
What is it about? Like, is it that the people who always go somewhere secondarily are unsatisfied with what they have, or that I guess they've got the resources to go out and get more? They've always got the resources to go get more and the want to do it, and the people that they meet when they arrive at these lands are, I guess, satisfied, or they don't need more. They're just doing their thing, and then disease and war and genocide and slavery happens just because it happens over and over and over again. There's something we need to research.
The very first world thing you could think of is, like the idea of why does somebody go there and then try to change it? Is if you just think of like. In France, there's whole British communities of just people who are retiring, going there and be like, cool, yeah, now I'm in the sun now, this is great, this is our place now, and I'm not going to learn French, I'm just going to speak English now. And then there's whole little areas of where just completely like...
Yeah, totally. In Spain, loads.
It's probably the same thing, isn't it? Of just in case going somewhere, being like, I like this, I want to stay here, and now it's mine. No one can tell me different. And it's either having the power or, realistically, in our terms, it's the money, to push your weight.
There are fewer genocides in those communities, as I understand.
There is a much lower percentage of genocides.
All these older white British people enslaving the French, like, I don't think that was too often these days. But
I mean that's the very.
But I know what you mean on principle. It's pretty low.
So I guess it's how it hasn't stopped even. It's different. But I guess the the biggest difference you'd see though is in the sense of how it could be done right is when people go over and they learn the language, they learn the culture, they integrate into the society, and it's a case of you can bring a bit of your culture over, but you're not stamping out the one that's there, if you know what I mean. And like,
people don't go to integrate. People go because they're like, "Ooh, I like what you've got. I want," and then they just take, right?
But I don't want to.
I think historically that's a simple way of looking at it. I think obviously how the world actually looks now, and obviously America's a great example of this whole melting pot kind of thing of so many different cultures coming into together. Like what it is to be American is obviously not really. There isn't like Native American, of course, different, but like a modern day idea of what an American is obviously this kind of almost petri dish slash like test to see if this whole complete melting pot idea works. And so I think that is there is value in that, and there is value in sort of the globalization and kind of sharing of ideas and sharing of wealth. Again, obviously that's just so intertwined, so in completely mixed with human greed and human sort of exploitation that it's becomes pretty appalling.
Yeah, so it's the point of like, say usually you'd go to an area because you've got an interest from where you were from previously, but if you fully integrate, you can bet that your previous interest is a lot less interesting anymore than it ever was, because you're like, well, now I've made a new life for myself. The things I cared about when I was over there don't really matter anymore. So and when you think of it in the sense of like greed and wealth, you can imagine you go over there and you want to keep that vested interest, and the way to do that is, rather than you integrate, is to bring over what you previously had and then set that up, if that makes sense. So for the First Nations, so that's in Canada, isn't it? And that's for like the native people there. And then when it goes to Inuits or you say Eskimos, is that further north above Canada, or is it still within it?
The Eskimos were originally from further north.
Okay, yeah. So everything within that is all within. Yeah. So
basically, it was like below there was sort of the Chippy one. So that's kind of Eskimos at the top.
That's madness. Like so far, that's in the wilderness. There's like the depths of the winter desert.
Yeah, winter desert. Yeah. So I'll start to wrap up now. So is there anything you can think, any kind of takeaways you feel from like before you started researching to after, or do you feel like you kind of went in knowing you're going to find bad stuff, and then you came out on the other side being like, yeah, I found bad stuff?
I think there's knowing the answer before thinking you know the answer before you research it is slightly dangerous, but in this case, it was fairly accurate, really.
Yeah,
I definitely knew that I wouldn't know much, but it definitely opened my eyes to, like, I know it sounds so stupid, but recognizing that people, like, it's not just being from a place. That's the thing. Like, there's so much more. It's not just about like you were there, and also that, like, also the fact that these histories are so much longer than I even imagined. I just kind of just because history in school, I know for me, us was like Georgians and Tudors and Romans and Greeks and the oldest people were the Egyptians, and then that's it. And it's kind of like they're people who've been around for unbelievable length of time in the same place with such complex behaviours and beliefs. And it's like, I just had no idea. No idea yet.
Well, I think it's we started with the Georgia for the other episode, and like just focusing on one country, which is very current and present, and you're like, there's so much stuff we don't know about it. And I think I've probably naively tried to go into a huge area. I think the biggest takeaway from it has probably been of like, what do we actually classify as somebody as being native, and like it's so complex and nuanced that it's hard to even grasp the full concept. And you can all say, in the grander scheme of things, we all come from the same place, and you could say, oh, why don't we just all live in harmony? We're all the same we're all the same species, stuff like that. But there's so much like history, which is you can't just wipe away,
and you can't undo anything, right?
That's it. So we can try and work to a better future, but you can't just ignore the past for what's happened. You can learn from it, but there's a lot of like learning that isn't done, if you know what I mean. And there's so much more to learn. Yeah,
that's a nice way to end it. Actually, I like that. There's always something more to learn, which is why this podcast will go on.
Yeah, and there is just one thing we're forgetting. To brighten it a little bit, it's It's the fact of the show.
Johnny's little fact of the evening.
Oh yes, what we're doing, we're bringing up the longest man-made structure in the world. Oh, get ready, guys, buckle up. So, can you have a guess? What do you think the longest man-made structure is in the world?
Didn't we guess
Yeah,
like
25.
a road or something?
No, I didn't say the fact. You spitballed. You said it was going to be a bad one, but you're going to be completely wrong because it's great.
Is it? Oh, wait, hang on a second. Is it a really long piece of string or something stupid?
Nope. Alistair?
Is it something? I feel like it could be a road if it's just measured in sheer distance.
It's not the Wall of China. That's for sure. Man-made
it
structure.
wouldn't be
So
that.
a road I wouldn't probably classify as a man. Well, it is.
Yeah, because
but
people didn't
structure-
make roads.
Structure is.
How is a road not a man-made structure? What else is it? It's a piece of art.
Is it art? But so, it's not the Wall of China. It's 3 times longer than that. It is. Get ready for it. The Australian dingo fence.
Oh, I knew that. Oh, crap, I
It's
forgot about that.
3,488 miles long. They started building it in the early 1800s and they finished 1885. And it was first built to keep rabbits and dingoes out.
And does it do it? No.
And if you think of like Australia, so it kind of like, say if you go from the south to the east, kind of like that section, it's just fully fenced off. Just for rabbits. Why even try? Fence yourself in, not an entire part of a country.
A big country as well. A continent, literally a subcontinent. Or whatever.
Yeah. And 12,
We're gonna build it. Yeah.
12 people work on it. And I feel that's for over like only 3,500 miles.
Underkill.
12 people seems like not a lot. And they go
Just
up and
Jerry
down
and the gang.
maintaining it. And it's not some big fancy thing either. It's just like regular old fence posts with some chicken wire. And it's about a third of the country it fences off. I think it's just
absolute madness.
hilarious. It's not even impressive. It's just really long. It's just, imagine like what do you do?
It's not making it onto the Great Wonders of the World list anytime soon, I don't think. The Great Australian Dingo.
It's like, what's your job? I work in the longest man-made structure. Oh wow, that's really impressive. It's just a regular fence, guys. It's not even that good.
I just like the idea that it stops somewhere, like just stops, like that's it. It do run out.
You see, like, do you see like the Wall of China that goes into the sea, which I think is absolutely mad. But
Yeah,
I wonder if
I had heard of this. I had heard of this dingo fence. I'm so annoyed I didn't remember that.
Imagine dingoes and rabbits trying to swim around it. I don't know. I just think it's
Can dingoes swim? I don't know. That's on for next episode.
Anyway, that's my
That was actually quite, that's my favourite of your facts so far, John.
end the episode a bit more lighthearted. But yeah, there we go. Thank you for listening to us for this week. You'll catch us next week. We'll catch ourselves in about 10 seconds. And that's been me, Johnny. It's been Freddie, and it's been Alistair. Thanks, goodbye.
Thanks, love you, bye.
I'm not so sure about the love you thing. I want to take that back.
Reflecting on it? Oh no, I've decided I actually don't love any of you. Thank you for your time.
Also,
And thank you for listening to this episode of No Idea Yet. If you like the show, you can always follow us on Instagram. It's No Idea Yet Podcast. And if you have any comments, information you thought we missed, or recommendations for the future, drop us an email on noideayetpodcast@gmail.com. Stay tuned every Saturday when we drop our new episodes. And you can also follow us and like any episodes you like. And this has been quite a particularly sensitive topic. So if there's anything you do want to mention, if you think we have done anything which could be offensive or it's incorrect, please let us know. That would be great. Thank you. And thanks for listening.